In the realm of human relationships, truth often manifests as a painful revelation, especially when it comes to severing ties. People often tend to hold on to those who have already mentally and emotionally distanced themselves, indulging in the hope that it is enough to put in more effort, prove their worth, or find a way to restore the former harmony. However, there lies a deep truth here, which Jung shrewdly recognized. If a person no longer desires to be around, it manifests in obvious signs. According to Jung, the subconscious constantly sends signals, subtly hinting at uncomfortable truths through intuition, emotions, and physical sensations. The unpleasant feeling from a cold response, the feeling of emptiness as the connection weakens, all these are manifestations of the subconscious. But instead of listening to these signals, people often prefer to ignore them. The reason lies in fear, the fear of being rejected, the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being abandoned. Rejection leaves a deep wound in a person's psyche, affecting the very foundations of their identity. When someone stops loving, it causes not only a sense of loss, but also makes one doubt their own worth, wondering, why wasn't I good enough? At this point, Jung suggests rethinking the situation. It's not about meeting someone else's expectations, but about staying true to yourself. If a person no longer wants to be around, it manifests not in words, but in a change in their energy. There are still many discoveries ahead about how to recognize these subtle but significant changes in behavior and attitude, which can become the key to understanding the true state of affairs in relationships. Carl Jung, the eminent Swiss psychologist, in his writings paid special attention to the phenomenon of projection, a psychological mechanism by which a person unconsciously attributes their own unacceptable or unacknowledged qualities, feelings, and motives to other people. In the context of interpersonal relationships, when we desperately try to keep a person close to us whose feelings for us have faded, we unwittingly project onto them our own unquenchable thirst for love, recognition, and emotional intimacy. We naively believe that this person is capable of filling our inner deficit, granting us the acceptance, security, and deep self-knowledge that we are unable to find on our own. This is where the root of the problem lies. The more persistently we strive to maintain a connection with someone who no longer resonates with us, the further we move away from our true essence, from our inner truth. Jung argued that the subconscious always strives for truth, even if that truth causes pain and discomfort. Sooner or later, we begin to notice alarming signs that we previously diligently ignored. Concise answers, lack of former enthusiasm, fading interest in spending time together and sharing life's moments. It's not that this person is deliberately hiding their true feelings from us, but that we ourselves stubbornly refuse to see the obvious. Our conscious mind desperately seeks rational explanations. Perhaps he or she is just busy now, going through a difficult period, and everything will definitely return to normal if we put in even more effort. However, the subconscious, this deep reservoir of wisdom, unerringly recognizes the truth. It knows that one-sided relationships inevitably lead to suffering and disappointment, that desperately clinging to someone who no longer chooses us is nothing more than a form of self-deception, an escape from reality. Jung also spoke of individuation, a complex and multifaceted process of becoming a whole, authentic personality, unlocking one's unique potential. One of the most difficult and painful stages of this path is letting go, freeing oneself from everything that no longer serves our development and well-being. This means letting go not only of people, but also of outdated ideas, unfulfilled expectations, and stories that no longer reflect our true essence. When someone stops loving us, pain arises not only because of his or her departure, but also because of the internal struggle between what we desperately desire and what is actually there, between illusions and harsh reality. However, The key here is to realize that letting go is not a loss, but a valuable acquisition. It is the acquisition of crystal clarity, inexhaustible energy, and the necessary space to attract into your life what is truly in tune with your soul. As Jung wisely noted, the universe and our subconscious always act together. When something leaves us, it opens the door for something more beautiful and harmonious. But to realize this positive scenario, it is necessary to have the courage to accept the truth, no matter how painful it may seem. Unfortunately, many people subconsciously avoid this truth because it brings a sense of uncertainty and forces them to admit that we have no control over the feelings and actions of others. Nevertheless, there is something over which we have absolute control: our reaction to the world around us. And when the moment comes to accept this truth, an amazing transformation occurs. At first, the emptiness can be deafening, and there is a feeling as if something integral has been taken away from you. But then, in the silence that forms after this loss, a voice begins to break through that was previously unheard. Your own inner voice, drowned out by the need to meet other people's expectations, the fear of loneliness, and the naive hope that everything can still change for the better. Carl Jung deeply understood that the root of human suffering lies not so much in the pain itself as in the desperate resistance to inevitable change. We stubbornly cling to the illusory idea that love should be eternal, that people who sincerely love will never leave us, and that with enough effort everything will surely work out. However, reality is often different. Love is a kind of mirror of our consciousness. And when a connection ceases to resonate with your true essence, its energy inevitably changes, not because of someone's fault, but because everything in this world is in continuous movement and development. The human mind skillfully masks the fading of feelings, erecting protective barriers against emotional pain, and sometimes we do not immediately realize how interest is slipping away. We invent excuses for alienation, ignoring, and indifference, convincing ourselves that these are only temporary difficulties caused by stress, and that only a little effort is needed to get everything back on track. However, the harsh truth is that when love leaves a person's heart, their life continues as if you were never there. You realize this when you find that you are no longer part of their world. And it's not about hatred or a desire to hurt, but about the fact that this person's energy is directed elsewhere. This is not punishment, but rather a call to self-analysis, to explore the reasons why you cling to something that no longer brings joy and why you are so afraid to let go. Carl Jung spoke of projection, emphasizing that we often seek in others what we deny ourselves. Perhaps you are trying to find love in someone who is not capable of giving it because you have not yet learned to love yourself. Perhaps you are hoping for recognition from a person who has long since distanced themselves because you have not yet recognized yourself. Life has an amazing ability to teach us the necessary lessons, and if you stubbornly pursue someone who has already made their choice, suffering will only intensify. Love is not a burden of obligations, but harmony, and if this harmony is broken, then holding on only prolongs your torment. You will feel it when the words lose their warmth, when the answers become lifeless, when there is no longer a sincere glow in this person's eyes, not because of their cruelty, but because of a change in their feelings. So, the key question before us is, how will we deal with this bitter truth? We have a choice: to reject it, to stubbornly cling to the past, nurturing futile hopes for change. Or, listening to Jung's wise advice, we can accept this lesson, allow the pain to do its cleansing work, and finally be free. Letting go does not mean betraying your love or diminishing the pain you have experienced. It means that we value ourselves so much that we will not humiliate ourselves by being content with crumbs of attention. It means that we put the harmony of our inner world above a pointless struggle. It is the realization that life is relentlessly moving forward, and we do not need to forcibly hold on to what was not originally intended for us. The people who are destined to be in our lives will enter it naturally and effortlessly. We will not have to beg, persuade, or prove our worth. When we let go, a transformation takes place within us. At first it can be painful, but over time, in this emptiness, in this space that seemed unbearable, something new begins to emerge. Freedom. We remember who we are outside the framework of this relationship, what inspires us, what makes our eyes shine. We begin to discover in ourselves those facets that we neglected, desperately trying to hold on to what has long faded. Jung argued that our subconscious always strives for balance. When something collapses, when someone leaves, it means that a new, better version of us is waiting in the wings. But we can only recognize it if we stop living in the past. It's not easy, I understand. Inside us, there will be a desperate desire to hold on, to send one last message, to make one last call, to seek out one last ray of hope. But each time we give in to these impulses, we only prolong our suffering. Perhaps the harshest truth that life forces us to accept sooner or later is this: if someone genuinely wants you in their life, you will undoubtedly feel it. You will catch it in their words, notice it in their actions, and sense it in their energy. You won't have to puzzle over hidden messages or find excuses for their indifference. True connection is always transparent and clear. It doesn't plunge you into a whirlpool of doubts, nor does it force you to desperately fight to be noticed and appreciated. The pinnacle of self-love is acknowledging that someone has let you go, choosing your own well-being, and courageously ending what has run its course. Release what's gone, and you will open the door to what is truly destined for you. If you sense that someone isn't drawn to you, trust your feelings. And when you finally accept this as a given, you will discover something amazing. It turns out that your life, your world, your happiness never depended on another person. They were always within you, patiently waiting for you to choose them. In moments of loss, the mind tends to play cruel tricks on us. It frantically searches for reasons, constructs explanations, and invents justifications. It desperately tries to convince itself that if you change a little, put in a little more effort, find the right words, everything will return to normal. But here is an undeniable truth that Jung so deeply understood. What is gone forever. What does not resonate with you in unison cannot stay close. And what is truly meant for you will never require you to violate yourself. We often find it extremely difficult to accept this idea because it implies relinquishing illusory control. We have been taught since childhood that hard work will inevitably bring the desired result. However, in relationships, this principle does not work. It is impossible to control another person's feelings. You cannot force them to love you if their heart no longer beats in the same rhythm as yours. Of course, you can compromise, sacrifice your interests, dissolve into another person, tolerate neglect, and keep silent about your needs. However, such a path will inevitably lead to the loss of your own identity. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, emphasized the need to accept one's shadow, those aspects of personality that we try to ignore. Often, we desperately cling to those who no longer feel affection for us, fearing to face the truth about ourselves reflected in their rejection. We are tormented by the fear that their departure indicates our inferiority, our lack of love. But this is the insidious self-deception. The value of our personality is not determined by someone else's love. Our dignity does not depend on the presence or absence of another person in our life. This decision belongs solely to ourselves. When someone loses interest in you, it manifests in the fact that you cease to be a priority. Answers become evasive, indifferent, and concise. and conversations, previously casual and easy, turn into strained dialogues with the stranger. This happens not out of a desire to cause pain, but because of a change in the energetic field between you. And even if it's painful, even if everything inside resists parting, the most courageous decision is to accept the truth. Truth liberates, although it causes suffering, but it is precisely this that becomes the first step towards healing. Jung argued, "What we resist persists." And the more we resist realizing that someone no longer wants to be a part of our life, the more suffering we cause ourselves. Not because that person is cruel, but because the universe itself, life, our subconscious, is pushing us towards liberation. At first, the mind rebels, trying to convince us that the person just needs time, that something could be done to change their mind. But here lies the truth. Genuine love is not begged for. If someone wants to be in your life, they will demonstrate it, and if not, that will also become obvious. However, sometimes we refuse to notice the signs, because that would mean facing the torment of their absence. But this torment is not the end, but a sacred space, a rebirth. This is the moment when you can rediscover yourself, remember who you were before this relationship, before meeting this person. For love is not dissolving in someone else, but sharing your light without letting it fade. When someone no longer wants you, it becomes noticeable. And when you finally break free, you realize something greater. Life goes on. Pain is not eternal. New horizons await their discovery. But you will only be able to see them when you stop looking back. Then comes the inevitable moment of truth, when lying to yourself becomes impossible. Every missed message, every distant answer, every empty promise outweighs all the excuses you made to yourself. There is no more room for doubt, maybes, or false hopes. All that remains is the naked truth. The connection is severed, the bonds have weakened, the feeling has changed. And the painfulness of this lies not only in the fact that the other person no longer desires you, but also in the internal struggle between accepting this reality and desperately clinging to what has long ceased to exist. However, it is at this very moment that Carl Jung points to an alternative route, capable of leading us beyond despair and struggle. The great psychologist instructed us to see in every emotional upheaval an opportunity for profound transformation. And it's not about naively idealizing suffering at all, but about realizing that at the very heart of pain lies a seed of future growth, a valuable lesson that will only become available when we stop the fruitless search for answers in the outside world and turn our gaze inward. We stubbornly hold on to the past, driven by the fear of losing something that seems irreplaceable to us. But have we ever wondered what we are really losing? Often, longing takes hold of us not for a specific person, but for the version of ourselves that we were during that relationship. We grieve for a deceptive illusion, for an unfulfilled dream. But true love is not a mirage, not requiring constant proof and conviction. It arises naturally, unconditionally, without intrigue and exhausting doubts. If the other person's feelings have faded, this is not a signal to double your efforts, but a sign that your life paths have diverged. Of course, parting hurts. It's hard to let go of the ghostly world created in our imagination. It's painful to accept the collapse of hopes. But pain is not our enemy. The real enemy is resistance to the inevitable. Jung viewed the subconscious as a powerful force, striving for harmony. A breakup is not a punishment or an accident, but a manifestation of the desire to restore balance in our lives. Sometimes we cling to what causes us suffering, not because of a real need, but because of the gaping void that forms after the loss. However, this gaping void is not the end, but rather a vast field for starting the process of restoring emotional balance. When another person's feelings fade, it manifests itself in subtle details, in the loss of former interest, in the gradually increasing emotional detachment, which becomes more and more tangible every day. This does not happen out of a desire to cause pain, but because of the transformation of this person's internal energy. And here arises perhaps the most difficult lesson. It is impossible to forcibly resurrect faded feelings, but it is in our power to decide what to do with this reality. You can plunge into denial, engage in a fruitless struggle, thereby only prolonging the agony, or you can accept the situation and take a decisive step, return to yourself. After all, by freeing yourself from what is no longer yours, you begin to return what was lost, what you gave up in order to maintain a relationship that has long exhausted itself. This is not an easy path, because growth is always associated with difficulties, but the moment of liberation brings with it an internal transformation. The futile expectation of answers that will never sound ceases, and energy is no longer spent on resuscitating what has long gone into oblivion. Instead, a new vision opens up. Space appears for rethinking, for reuniting with yourself, for attracting into life what is in true harmony with your essence. And over time comes an awareness that at first seemed unattainable. In fact, nothing is lost. On the contrary, there is a chance to start all over again, to build a life where love is not a battlefield, but a natural, harmonious connection, where you don't have to beg someone to stay, because people who are destined to be together never need persuasion. There comes a moment of truth when the veil of illusions falls, and you stop looking for non-existent signs of fate. You let go of the tormenting longing for bygone days, and at this moment, a change is born in your inner world. Not suddenly, not without emotional pain, but gradually there comes a feeling of lightness, a pacifying silence. After all, the most exhausting thing is not the rejection itself, but the desperate battle to preserve what has long turned into ruins. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the path to finding the true self. The most important stage of this path is realizing which relationships nurture your growth and which, like vampires, suck your energy. Sometimes we cling to places where there is no reciprocity, confusing love with painful addiction. It seems to us that by letting go, we will lose something invaluable, but in fact, by staying where we are not welcome, we lose ourselves. You will notice this in the shortening conversations, in the answers devoid of former enthusiasm, in the oppressive pauses of silence. Not because the other person deliberately wants to hurt you, but because their energy no longer resonates with yours. And the acute pain lies not in the changes themselves, but in our stubborn unwillingness to accept them. Your mind will search for justifications. You'll convince yourself that the person is simply going through a difficult period, that you just need to wait a little longer, and everything will return to normal. But Jung taught us that the subconscious always knows the truth before the conscious mind does. And when you stop denying the obvious, when you stop defending what cannot be held, you will realize that the answer was always inside you. You don't need irrefutable proof to understand that someone no longer wants to be a part of your life. You don't need farewell words or confirmations of what you felt for a long time. Love isn't just beautiful words, it's tangible actions, directed energy, and a conscious choice in your favor. When that choice disappears, when the connection fades, clinging to the past becomes unbearably painful. This is where the key moment arrives. Letting go isn't a sign of weakness, but a true act of self-love. It's acknowledging your own worth, refusing to stay where you're no longer fully accepted. It's prioritizing your own well-being over the fear of loneliness, choosing the uncertainty of the future over the illusory stability of a relationship that only brings suffering. Making such a decision is a difficult path, because everything related to personal growth requires effort. But when you finally decide to let go, stop waiting and hoping for change, you gain something entirely new: freedom. In this freedom comes the realization that you haven't lost anyone, but have only regained yourself. And then that day arrives, ordinary and unremarkable. You wake up and realize that the pain has subsided, that you're no longer waiting for a message that will never come, that there's no longer a gnawing ache in your chest when you think about that person. The wound, no matter how deep, begins to heal. In the process of healing, you become stronger, wiser, closer to your true self. If someone no longer wants to be with you, you will definitely feel it. But when you accept this fact, you'll notice something else. Life goes on. Love cannot be forced. And the most correct decision you can make is to always choose yourself. There comes a turning point in life when a complete transformation occurs. This doesn't happen because someone from the past returns or because you receive long-awaited answers, but because you free yourself from obsessive thoughts and expectations. You stop hoping for something that will never happen, stop asking why, and let go of the hope of restoring what has already been destroyed. In that moment comes the realization: true inner peace is found not in holding on, but in knowing how to let go. Carl Jung, the eminent psychologist, taught us that life is a continuous movement, a constant change, where growth and development are inevitable. In this dynamic process, some people stay close, supporting us, while others choose their own path. It's important to understand that no separation is a true loss if something more valuable is gained in return: a deep connection with oneself. After all, the strongest pain arises not from the absence of another person, but from the time spent ignoring your own intuition and resisting obvious facts. When you accept that you are no longer loved, you are freed from the emotional burden of expectation and simultaneously create space for new opportunities. This space is filled with people who genuinely value you, new knowledge, relationships that develop naturally and harmoniously, and a life in which you don't have to persuade anyone to stay. True love isn't a deal, a contract that requires proof of your own worth to be chosen. Real love is free, mutual, and based on a conscious choice without pressure, despair, or fear. It's in this newly regained space of clarity that a real miracle happens. You begin to see yourself through different eyes. Remember what you were like before the relationship began, before insecurity and inner struggle consumed you. You return to the source of your energy, rediscover your love for yourself and an unquenchable enthusiasm for life, as if rediscovering a long-forgotten spring. Suddenly, you realize that the other person wasn't the missing element that completed you, but that you yourself, in the hustle and bustle of days, had lost the understanding of your own wholeness and self-sufficiency. The words of Carl Jung about synchronicity come to mind. The amazing harmony that arises between a person and the universe when they follow the call of their heart and live in accordance with their truth. As soon as you let go of what no longer serves as a support, new horizons and opportunities begin to open up before you as if by magic. Roads that previously seemed impassable part, because you no longer waste precious energy fighting what is holding you back, but direct it towards moving forward, towards new achievements and personal growth. Instead of asking yourself, why did this person stop loving me? It's worth asking yourself, why am I still seeking validation from someone who is unable to give it to me? The real task is not to restore a lost relationship, but to restore yourself, your confidence, and your self-esteem. When someone truly wants to be a part of your life, you will undoubtedly feel it. There will be no room for doubt, conflicting signals, or an exhausting struggle for attention. Conversely, if a person is no longer interested in your presence, you will also feel it. The only question is how you will deal with this truth. Today, I suggest you consider this. How often have you ignored warning signs, succumbing to the fear of loneliness? How often have you made excuses for another person's disinterest just to avoid facing the painful reality? It's time to face the truth and make a choice in favor of yourself.